Hello gardeners! Welcome to my March garden guide where I share over 40 different veggies, flowers, and herbs to give you all inspiration on what to plant this month and encourage you to try growing something new. I'm super excited to share all of these planting ideas with you, including some unique or lesser known crops you may have never heard of. I have ideas for everyone no matter where you're located. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara. I've been gardening all of my life and I'm a professional seed and plant nursery. I love to share my knowledge and teach others how to garden and grow food, so you've come to the right place if you want to improve your gardening skills. March 20th is the first day of spring this year, so I'm sure a lot of you are excited to finally start your spring gardens. Or maybe you're a hot climate gardener like me and are just taking in the last few weeks of nice weather, temperature-wise, before things just get crazy hot. I'm going to go through each crop category and list exactly when you need to start planting it, whether you're a hot climate gardener or a cold climate gardener. I have ideas for everybody. Before we begin, just so you know, the description of this video is full of resources to help you with your garden this month. You can find links to a copy of all of my crop ideas on my website so you can reference it and not have to take notes. There is a free printable PDF checklist of what you can plant right now. I am doing a free live garden class right here on my YouTube channel later this month. I'll put the date and time below. I also have seeds or plants on my website for just about everything I'm going to mention, so check out the links in the description. All right, let's get into this garden guide for the month of March. First, let's talk about beans. If you passed or will be passing your last spring frost date right now in March, then it's a fantastic time to direct sow green bean seeds, meaning the type of beans grown to eat the entire pot. There are two types of green beans, bush beans and pole beans. I recommend bush beans like Blue Lake or Provider if you have a small garden or are growing in containers or green stock garden towers. And that's because the plants are very compact, usually staying at around 12 inches tall. If you have more space and can provide a vertical garden structure, then grow pole or vining beans. They take up more space but produce a lot more than bush beans. My personal favorite pole beans is Rattlesnake and Kentucky Blue. Then we have bean crops grown to not eat the pods. Instead, the pods are allowed to dry out so you can shell out the dried beans and store them away. Basically, every kind of dried bean you can think of can be direct sown once you're past your last spring frost date. That includes black beans, pinto, garbanzo, kidney beans, lima beans, and the list really goes on. If you want to grow dry storage beans to put away enough for 1 year, grow 15 to 20 plants per person in your household. It will vary depending on the type of bean you're growing, but aim for something within that range. Another bean crop that I feel is not grown enough in the United States is fava beans. This was actually one of the very first crops to be cultivated by humans thousands of years ago. If you're just passing your last spring frost date, then go ahead and direct sow seeds for fava beans. They grow best in cooler temperatures than green beans or lima beans, so they will be really happy growing just after your last spring frost date. If you passed your last spring frost date before this month of March, like me, I passed mine in February, or maybe you don't even have a frost date like my zone 11 and up gardeners, then do not plant fava beans right now. It's going to get way too hot for them very, very soon. Plan on growing them in fall once temperatures cool down again. My last bean type crop recommendation is one very close to my heart, and that's guandules, also called pigeon peas. My family is from the Dominican Republic and we eat a lot of guandules. This crop is part of the bean or legume family, but it has a totally different growth habit and life cycle. It grows into a 6-foot tall, very bushy mini shrub. It's a short-lived perennial, so to speak, in warmer tropical and subtropical climates, typically living around 2 years. You will harvest multiple times off from just one plant, but it takes 6 to 9 months for it to start producing from the time you planted the seed. I recommend you direct sow the seeds once you are 1 month past your last spring frost date and the soil has warmed up a bit. Or you can sow seeds indoors about 6 weeks before your target date of planting them into the garden. Guandules hate having their roots disturbed, so only sow seeds indoors in a larger size container, then put it on a heat mat to keep the soil warm. Guandules will not germinate well if you don't keep them warm. I am sowing seeds indoors to transplant next month in April. By that point, I will be 2 months past my last spring frost date. If everything grows well, I will be harvesting sometime in fall. I do not recommend guandules as a crop for those of you in garden zones below 10 because it just gets way too cold for them. Okay, those are my bean or legume recommendations for March. One thing I want to say is if you're a hot climate gardener, as in your area does not get snow, spring and fall are really your only chance to plant the bean crops I just mentioned because they don't grow well in the extreme heat of summer, except for guandules. So just putting it out there, beans are not a summer crop for hot climate gardeners. Instead, you should switch to non-traditional tropical bean crops to grow during the summer, like yard-long beans, winged beans, or southern peas, for example. We will get into that starting next month in April because April is when I start transitioning to summer crops. Again, this tip is for hot climate gardeners only. I just wanted to give you all a heads up. Spring is also a fantastic time to grow sweet corn. I try to grow as much of it as possible by direct sowing seeds as soon as I pass my last spring frost date. That way I can grow them and hopefully harvest before all the pests wake up from their winter dormancy, because they love to chew up sweet corn. After I harvest my spring sweet corn, then I start planting more tough corn varieties like flint, dent, or popcorn that will make it through to harvest time in summer. There are so many sweet corn varieties to choose from. I particularly like Silver King. It just always performs very well for me and has a delicious sweet flavor. Flint, dent, and popcorn varieties have very hard seed shells and are not eaten fresh like sweet corn. These types of corn have high carbohydrate content, making them better suited to grind into corn flour, make masa or masa arepa, grits, etc. And then popcorn is used for making popcorn. March is a great time to plant lots of flowers to attract pollinators, so they are already visiting your garden by the time your spring crops start producing. That way they can help pollinate everything. I had someone ask me a question. Their garden is all overgrown right now. They need to clean it out to start their spring garden, but they were hesitant because in that overgrowth was a lot of flowers and things that the bees and other pollinators were enjoying. So they kind of were torn between cleaning out the space so they can plant or leaving it for the pollinators. A strategy that I use to avoid this is to plant a lot of flowers and perennial pollinator plants at the edges of my garden where they can have a permanent spot. That way, when I clear out my garden space in the middle, even though I have to pull out some flowers, the bees and things still have other flowers at the edges of my garden. I have a perimeter around my garden full of dwarf fruit trees, so I plant the flowers in between or underneath them. Focus on perennial flowers that will be a permanent addition to your garden and will always support the bees and butterflies. In my garden, I noticed the bees and butterflies really go crazy over African blue basil, tithonia, also called Mexican sunflower, or any sunflower for that matter, any kind of salvia, zinnias, and passion fruit flowers. Different species prefer different types of flowers, so having diversity is the best way to attract a lot of pollinators to your garden. Okay, so moving along, let's talk about greens. As I mentioned with the beans, March is pretty much the last chance for hot climate gardeners to plant a lot of cool season greens. So take advantage, plant some right now so you harvest before things get way too hot. If you're past your last spring frost date, then direct sow seeds for lettuce. I'm planting up my last succession sowing of lettuce right now in March. I'm focusing on heat tolerant varieties because the heat is returning very soon, so I will get more harvest out of them. That includes any kind of romaine lettuce. Their leaves are more tough or stiff, so they hold up to the heat better than a softer lettuce like a butterhead, for example. And then I have this theory that any darker colored version of a vegetable crop also tolerates more heat. So on top of choosing a romaine lettuce, I also choose one that has darker colors like super red romaine, which is one of my favorites, and is also one of the last lettuces to finally give out in the heat. To make your lettuce last longer or prevent bolting as much as possible, it might be a good idea to throw some 40% shade cloth over your lettuce plants and make sure they have plenty of water. If the plants get stressed out from being too hot or too dry, that initiates the process of bolting or sending up a flower stalk, which means the plant thinks it's at the end of its life cycle. It just wants to produce seed and that's it. A lot of crops also taste bitter once they go to bolt, so that is why bolting is not desirable. Now let's say you struggle to grow lettuce because it's just way too hot. I have a ton of alternative leafy green ideas that will grow well and provide greens that can be used in a salad. The first one that comes to mind is New Zealand spinach. If you're past your last spring frost date, go ahead and direct sow seeds. It is a low growing plant with soft leaves that reminds me of a butterhead lettuce in texture. It is a long-lived annual, so you'll get more harvest out of it than when compared to a lettuce. It has a very mild flavor, similar to lettuce as well. March is a great time to direct sow seeds for Swiss chard, which is extremely heat tolerant. It's one of the last leafy greens to finally die from the summer heat in my garden. Each plant produces a ton over the course of many weeks. You can harvest the smaller baby leafy greens to use kind of like spinach in a salad, or harvest the larger, more mature leaves to use in cooked recipes. I especially love to use it to replace kale in any of my favorite kale recipes. I have another YouTube channel called Jera's Fresh Kitchen where I post my personal recipes, many of which using ingredients straight from my garden. I am trying my best to upload my recipes that use Swiss chard specifically because it's such an abundant leafy green producer, so I'm always trying to give others ideas on how to use it. If you have some delicious Swiss chard recipes, please comment and share it with me. But anyways, look at one of my Swiss chard patches. I just sprinkled a bunch of seeds right here in this spot and they grew very fast. You don't need many Swiss chard plants to feed a family. This particular variety is a mix called Bright Lights Swiss chard because of its beautiful colored stems. Okay, moving along, I want to talk about mustards. Mustards can easily be grown by direct sowing the seeds in March if you're past your last spring frost date, or you can transplant. This spring I went all out with the mustard greens. I have so many growing right now because just like with Swiss chard, they produce a ton of leafy greens and have a decent heat tolerance. A lot of mustard greens have a peppery kick. Some people don't like that, but did you know that there are a lot of mustard greens that have no peppery flavor. Some are quite mild or have a umami, hearty type of savory flavor. I don't know how to describe it, but they are very delicious and are a great substitute for lettuce in a salad. So let me show you some that I have growing right now. I personally don't enjoy a strong peppery flavor, so I lean heavily on Asian mustard greens because they have a more mild flavor. And I also harvest them while the leaves are very small, tender baby greens. I even use some of them like microgreens. This right here is Mibuna, a Japanese mustard green. It has long spoon-shaped leaves. I even have some different varieties of Mizuna growing. This is the regular green Mizuna. And right here is a variety called Red Streaks. I just love how frilly and serrated the leaves look. It looks very beautiful in a salad. Right here is some tatsoi, which is a mustard green. It has very shiny, smooth leaves. It looks like spinach, chops like spinach, cooks down like spinach. So I think this is the best spinach substitute for hot climate gardeners. Spinach doesn't like the heat, so I can't really grow it many months out of the year, but I can grow tatsoi for at least half of the year here in Florida. It just doesn't have a strong spinach flavor, but it still tastes really good on its own. This is the regular green tatsoi, but it also comes as a red version. It's a hybrid, but it's a nice, beautiful red tatsoi variety. And this right here is Yukina Savoy, which is just a crinkled version of tatsoi. Another popular Asian mustard green is Komatsuna. This is a red hybrid version of Komatsuna that I love because of how intensely dark the leaves are. Lastly, we have the traditional mustard greens that do have a peppery flavor. I still grow these because I like the mild peppery flavor of their baby leaves. For the most part, these varieties grow into giant plants like the size of a small child. So lots of leafy green production per plant. I also like to grow them to produce leafy greens that I can feed to my chickens because they are just that productive. I always grow Florida broadleaf mustard greens because, hey, I'm in Florida. The leaves are massive. There is a really pretty curly leaf mustard with soft leaves that I liked called Southern Giant Curled, which you can see right here. I also like Japanese Giant Red for its reddish purple hued leaves, and then Crimson Tide mustard for its serrated leaves that look like seaweed. I could go on and on about mustards. It's a huge crop category. I feel like not too many gardeners really explore the variety of mustards that exist, so I encourage you to try some new ones this season. Did you know that bok choy is botanically classified as a mustard as well? But it looks very different and does not have a peppery flavor like a typical mustard. Which, by the way, if you have passed or will be passing your last spring frost date in March, it's a great time to direct sow seeds for bok choy. I grow lots of bok choy because I love cooking with it. I add it into Chinese hot pot, ramen, stir fries. I like to steam it with soy sauce and garlic. It grows so easy, is quick to harvest from seed. I plant many succession sowings of bok choy starting in the fall all the way through March, and that's when I start to stop because it doesn't like high heat conditions. Right now, I'm obsessed with this purple bok choy just because it's so pretty, and I can't find purple bok choy in the grocery store. I like growing things that I can't find at the grocery store. There are so many vegetables and things that I would never have the chance to eat if I didn't grow it myself. It also makes gardening so much more interesting. Next, let's talk about growing spinach. Those of you passing your last spring frost date right now in March can direct sow seeds for spinach, or if you're passing it in April or May, you can sow seeds indoors to grow your own transplants. Spinach does not like the heat whatsoever, so I don't recommend hot climate gardeners, areas that don't get snow, to continue planting spinach by this point. If you want to plant a heat-tolerant spinach, try a Chinese variety called Green Arrow. If the heat is not your concern, go with a classic smooth leaf spinach like Viroflay or the crinkled leaf Bloomsdale Longstanding. I have a few more leafy green suggestions, but specific for hot climates or cold climates. If you're a hot climate gardener, meaning you don't get snow or your summer days are constantly at 95 degrees Fahrenheit or above, start planting super heat tolerant tropical leafy greens. These will carry you through the summer. I recommend Malakia and Malabar spinach. Both of these you can direct sow the seeds or sow seeds indoors to grow out your own transplants. And then there's Chaya and South Sea salad tree. These are not propagated by seed, so you would transplant them. All of these leafy green crops produce a ton per plant and are very ornamental, so if you live in an HOA, they are great choices to include in your landscaping. They won't even know you're growing food. My cold climate friends that have not reached your last spring frost date yet, you can transplant or direct sow seeds for corn salad, also called mache, and a type of bok choy called wu choy because both of these leafy greens handle a lot of cold. Just protect young plants or newly germinated seedlings from the snow. You could cut the bottom of a plastic jug and flip it over your small plants, secure it with some landscape hooks, and basically you've created a mini greenhouse. My cold climate gardeners that want to grow rhubarb should plant them from crowns in spring when the soil warms up to at least around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Rhubarb really does not like the heat and grows best in areas where your summer high temperatures don't exceed 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not too many places in the United States. That's like for way up north states states like Oregon, Michigan, and Washington State. It's a good perennial crop for cold climates since it survives in very cold conditions. Okay, so that was the leafy greens and mustard crops. Let's talk about brassicas, which includes broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and much more. If you're a hot climate gardener, these crops are off limits by this point. If you planted some right now, it would take 3 to 4 months before you get to harvest. By then, it's just way too hot, and brassicas either get stunted in growth or they just bolt or flower instead of forming a head of broccoli or cabbage. You need to wait until fall to plant these again. However, there are a few exceptions, but you need to direct sow seeds right now, and that's huntasai, if I'm saying that correctly, which is a flowering stem leaf cabbage, and Chinese broccoli, which is a stem broccoli. It's grown to eat its stems that taste just like broccoli. Both of these have decent heat tolerance and can be used in your recipes that use broccoli as well. My cold climate gardener friends can rejoice. This is your time to grow brassicas. We are talking about broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, kohlrabi, and cabbage. If your summer days don't usually get over 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, then they would be very happy growing in your garden. That would be my deep cold climate gardeners like those of you in New York, Oregon, Minnesota, Michigan, etc. Y'all need to sow seeds indoors right now so your transplants are ready to go into the garden as soon as you're past your last spring frost date. Now, let's say you are located in an area that gets snow, but you have very hot summers. This includes a lot of Midwest gardeners. Brassicas is a little tricky because it doesn't like the high heat, so you might want to follow my recommendations for hot climate gardeners. Grow the huntasai or Chinese broccoli, because if you get a long stretch of high heat coupled with dry conditions, it will stress them out, which attracts pests, and they won't produce very well. In your situation, it would be best to grow brassicas during the early spring and fall. My next crop category is my favorite thing to grow, and that's tomatoes. I'm very strict with my opinion, so to speak, of the proper time to grow tomatoes. Everyone looks at tomatoes as a quintessential summer crop. It is a warm season crop, but what it is not is an extreme heat crop. If you have summer days consistently over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and definitely if it gets over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, do not grow tomatoes over the summer. It is a waste of time and effort, in my opinion. For one, they will attract a ton of diseases and pests. It's a very susceptible crop, and summer is the pinnacle of these issues. You will have to work extra hard to take care of tomato plants and treat them, etc. But more importantly, even if you get your tomato plants to survive, is the fact that once temperatures hit over 90 degrees Fahrenheit during the nighttime, they start to drop their flowers, which means no fruit. Also, at high temperatures, the pollen, which is the genetic material, gets damaged, and tomatoes have a hard time pollinating. That is why I don't recommend tomatoes during the summer for hot climate gardeners. Use that space to grow things that actually will thrive and produce, instead of just getting frustrated. Hot climate gardeners should grow tomatoes in the fall, winter, and spring. I'm explaining this in detail now because a lot of people are questioning why I say don't grow tomatoes during the summer if you're a hot climate gardener. So this is why. If you're passing your last spring frost date now in March, you should be transplanting tomatoes right now, not just be starting them from seed. If your last spring frost date is coming up in April or May, then now is the time to sow seeds indoors. And that's it. Everyone else, mostly hot climate gardeners, I don't recommend. You might get away with Everglades tomato or some super heat tolerant hybrid with a very long list of disease resistances. In my garden and my personal experience, only Everglades tomatoes makes it, but that's because they are naturalized all over Florida, so it can handle it. My advice on tomatoes is almost the same for peppers and eggplants. If you're passing your last spring frost date now in March, you should be transplanting them. If you're passing it in April or May, sow seeds indoors. My hot climate friends, same issue, inability to produce fruit in high heat situations, and the pests and diseases will overtake them. But there are a few exceptions. Research tropical varieties of peppers and eggplants. I grow a lot of cultivars from the Caribbean or places like Thailand. If it can grow and produce in those subtropical or tropical areas, then it will do pretty well here in my Florida garden during the summer. For peppers, I really like ají cachuca, criolla de cocina, cap 455, and any kind of hot peppers. For eggplants, focus on Asian or African varieties like Thai lavender frog eggplant or Thai pea eggplant. I still get production out of these varieties during the summer when the rest of them just shut down. Okay, next we have peanuts. Once you're 1 month past your last spring frost date, you can begin direct sowing seeds for peanuts. Or you can start them from seed indoors about 4 weeks before it's time to plant them into the garden to get a head start. They transplant pretty well, unlike beans. I really like a variety called wild jungle peanuts, said to have originated in the Amazon because they are the ancestors to the common peanut used in commercial production. They have a more savory flavor too. Now let's discuss a huge crop category, and that's squash. Squash can be subdivided into 2 types. Summer squash, which have a thin edible skin. A perfect example is the standard zucchini like Black Beauty or gray zucchini. And then you have winter squash, squash, also called storage squash. Their outer skin hardens up so they can store for 3 months or more, depending on the variety. Examples of winter squash include pumpkins, butternut squash, and seminole pumpkins. Spring is my preferred time to grow all of them because the pest and disease pressure is naturally down, so it's easier to grow squash. I recommend you direct sow seeds as soon as you're past your last spring frost date, but be prepared to cover seedlings if an unexpected late frost moves into your area. If you really struggle with growing squash because of squash bugs or the squash vine borer, then grow anything in the Cucurbita moscata family of squash because they have extra tough stems and leaves. It makes it harder for the pests to get into them. It's not impossible, just harder, which increases your chances of harvesting something. Examples of C. moscata squash include seminole pumpkins and tromboncino rapicante. Or you can try a squash alternative like chayote. There are also many types of edible gourds that are similar in texture and sometimes flavored to squash, like bottle gourd or immature loofah gourds. These are tropical crops that will produce straight through a very hot summer and are not susceptible to many of the diseases and pests that traditional squash get. And I also give the same recommendations when it comes to growing cucumbers. If you're past your last spring frost date or will be passing it in March, it is time to direct sow seeds for cucumbers. Take advantage to grow lots of them before the pests and diseases really get out of control. I like to grow pickling types of cucumbers in spring, and then I switch to Asian varieties that have better disease and pest resistances as I approach summertime. There are some varieties of cucumbers called parthenocarpic, which means they will produce fruit even if not pollinated. So that means every female flower will produce fruit. Growing parthenocarpic cucumbers like beta alpha or China jade is a way to drastically increase yields. And same as with squash, if you're struggling to grow cucumbers because of the pests and diseases, there are a few cucumber alternatives that are easier to grow. Try growing cucamelons, which makes for great miniature pickles, or try growing Indian snake cucumbers, Armenian cucumbers, or metki, which are all actually melons, not cucumbers, but have flavor and texture like a cucumber. All of these are extra tough plants and are good choices for beginner gardeners who are struggling to control the typical cucumber pests and diseases. If you're past or will be passing your last spring frost date in March, it's a great time to direct sow seeds for all sorts of melons. That includes cantaloupes, honeydew melons, or watermelon. I have more success growing them in spring than summer because here in Florida, it rains every single day during the summer, which not only causes the diseases to spread like crazy, but melons have a tendency to absorb a lot of water, more than what is normal. So this dilutes the flavor, and then the melons end up not tasting very sweet. So right now I'm going crazy direct sowing seeds for all sorts of melons so I can harvest before the end of June when the summer monsoon rains start to arrive. Now let's talk about the allium group of crops, which includes onions and leeks. If you're in a region that grows long day bulbing onions, meaning you grow bulbing onions during the summer, this is going to be my cold climate gardener friends, then you need to transplant live onion plants or bulb sets, whatever you prefer, right after your last spring frost date, not just be starting them from seed. If you're in a region that grows short day bulbing onions, this is gardeners in hot climates that grow onions during the winter, it's too late to be planting bulbing onions right now. You should have done that way back in fall. My cold climate gardener friends can also transplant live leek plants and shallot sets if you're passing your last spring frost date now in March. The key here is that you should be transplanting onions, leeks, and shallots, not just be starting them from seed, because they take like 3 months to be ready to plant when you grow them from seed. That's way too long, and then you will miss the entire season. However, everyone, including my hot climate gardeners, can direct sow seeds or use transplants if you want for bunching onions. This is what I'm doing now so I can grow some type of onion crop during the spring and summer. Bunching onions are way easier to grow when compared to something like a large bulbing onion. So if you're a beginner gardener, I always recommend that you start with bunching onions before trying bulbing onions, leeks, or shallots. Everyone that has passed or will be passing your last spring frost date in March can direct sow seeds or transplant herbs. They will thrive in the warm weather of spring, so take advantage to grow as many as possible. I grew these herbs from seed indoors. I just sprinkled a few seeds in each cell of a 72 cell seed tray so I could grow a ton of plants at once. On average, herbs grown in a 72 cell seed tray like this are ready to be transplanted in about 6 weeks. I find that if grown beyond that point, they start to get root bound, which is not good. I also like to direct sow herb seeds to fill in any empty spots in the garden. I just sprinkle seeds and gently rake them into the soil. Keep the soil moist and they will germinate very quickly. Finally, let's talk about some root crops. If you are passing your last spring frost date now in March or beyond, you should direct sow carrots and radish radish seeds 2 to 3 weeks before your last spring frost date. For carrots, a very good standard variety that will grow well for just about everyone is Danvers. Carrots need around 4 months to be ready for harvest from seed. If you expect temperatures to start exceeding 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit within the next 4 months, then grow the more heat-tolerant carrots like Carota or darker colored varieties like Cosmic Purple or Purple Haze. Carrots struggle when it gets hot and they taste bitter, so grow a more heat-tolerant type if you're worried about the heat that's coming very soon. As far as radish, they are all pretty much the same, just different colors and shapes. I grow a wide variety of them because they are so quick to be ready for harvest from seed, and not many pests or diseases bother them. If you like radish with peppery flavor, try the classic Cherry Belle, or if you want something more mild, try an Asian cultivar, also called daikon. If your ground is workable, even if you're not passing your last spring frost date in March, you can direct sow seeds for beets. They handle a lot of cold, so it's okay to grow them even if you're expecting some more cold fronts. Beets don't grow well in the heat, so I don't advise my hot climate gardener friends to plant some in March and going forward. Just wait until fall. I love to juice red beets, so I grow a lot of Detroit Red. I also mix beet juice with my homemade ginger and turmeric shots. I will link in the description to my recipe tutorial showing how I make 5 different flavors of ginger shots if you want to give it a try. My last root crop recommendations are for hot climate gardeners who are not expecting any more freezes. If you're past all danger of frost, then go ahead and start transplanting yucca, sweet potatoes, and taro. These are tropical root crops that do not like the cold. Yucca is planted from cuttings. We just harvested last year's yucca and cut the stems to make more cuttings. Then we planted them in the ground to be harvested next year in March. Sweet potatoes are grown from tubers or from slips. Plant those out once all danger of frost has passed. If you're waiting for that time to come, you can grow your own slips indoors in the meantime. Sweet potatoes take 4 to 6 months to be ready for harvest. Taro is grown from pieces of tuber. I go to my local Asian or Latin American grocery stores and buy all sorts of different taro, malanga, and edo tubers to plant in my garden. You just plant it in some soil and keep it watered. Taro and other similar root crops take anywhere between 9 to 12 months to get to harvest, depending on what you're growing. All of these tropical tubers grow very well in hot climates where traditional potatoes will not. They also yield a lot of pounds of food per plant, so I encourage you to try growing them if you're a hot climate gardener. I hope this March garden guide has given you plenty of ideas and motivation to start planting this spring. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up. That helps out my channel more than you know. Share this guide with your garden friends. Check out the description for the free resources that will help keep you on track, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my gardening tutorials. Thank you for watching and happy gardening.